Los Angeles in the summer heat looks invincible from a distance freeways like glowing veins, windows lit like a constellation that never goes dark. But behind one of those panes of glass, a bedroom window is nudged an inch. The screen whispers. A figure slides in without hurry, as if the night itself had found a key. In the morning, a city that sells dreams will wake to a different kind of advertisement. A front page that says no lock is really a lock when terror learns your habits. It began without pattern, and that was the point. A married couple who thought the dog's bark was nothing. A grandmother who left the kitchen light on the way she always did. A child breathing evenly in a warm, small room. Doors left for the breeze became invitations. The sound that followed was not a scream at first, but the quiet thud of drawers opened and closed. A breath too close to the pillow. The faint chemical scent of rubber on a floor. When the sirens finally arrived, they did not chase a car, they chased a rumor. Neighbors stood on lawns in their slippers and watched the tape go up. The cameras arrive, the body bags roll, as if the night had grown an audience. By week's end, hardware stores had no more deadbolts. People nailed windows shut and slept with the television on, praying that noise alone might keep a shadow away. The police stood in front of microphones and promised vigilance. But how do you patrol a city's every heartbeat? The killer moved by a primitive arithmetic opportunity plus darkness, and the rest of Los Angeles did the only math it could. If it happened here, it could happen next door. And if it could happen next door, it could happen to me. Before anyone knew his name, the city had already given him one, a myth too real to ignore. He was not a ghost. He was a man who liked the feeling of crossing thresholds that did not belong to him. He did not stalk one type of victim, he stalked certainty. The first chill was not in the blood he spilled, but in the realization that safety was a story we told ourselves to sleep. And tonight, that story had run out of pages. He was born Ricardo Leyva Munoz Ramirez, the 29th of February 1960, in El Paso, Texas, a child of the borderlands, where the desert meets dust and silence. To most neighbors, the Ramirezes were just another working-class family trying to survive. But inside that small home, the air was filled with violence. His father, Julian Ramirez, worked long hours on the railroads. He came home with a temper hotter than the Texas Sunday. When Richard disobeyed, the belt came off not as discipline, but as declaration. Pain is control. His mother, Mercedes, watched quietly, eyes fixed on the floor, praying for the storm to pass. It never did. Richard learned early that darkness offered shelter. He slept in cemeteries, sneaked into empty houses, stared at the moon for hours. And then came Mike the cousin, who would complete his transformation. Mike was a decorated Vietnam veteran, but the war had left its mark in ways no metal could hide. He told stories of decapitations, torture, and blood, not with shame, but with pride. When he returned to Texas, he brought home Polaroids of women he claimed to have killed, holding their heads like trophies. Richard was 12 when he first saw them. That summer, Mike began teaching him how to hunt humans, how to move quietly, how to strike first, how to make fear a weapon. One afternoon, as Richard sat in the kitchen, Mike's wife, Jessie, shouted at him for bragging about the war. Without warning, Mike pulled out a .38 revolver and shot her in the face, point blank right in front of Richard. Blood sprayed across the linoleum. Jessie collapsed, the coffee still steaming beside her. Richard didn't scream. He just stared. Something inside him clicked or broke forever. From that day, death stopped being real. He started skipping school, wandering the city at night. He stole, lied, experimented with drugs, and when he looked in the mirror, he saw not a boy, but a reflection that was finally free from consequence. By 16, he moved to Los Angeles, drifting through cheap motels and alleys that smelled of gasoline and decay. He became addicted to cocaine, stealing cars to feed the habit. Each theft thrilled him. Each break-in gave him a rush, a small rehearsal for the power he'd later crave. He was fascinated by Satanism, not as religion but as rebellion. He wore black, grew his hair long, carried a pentagram necklace. He whispered to the darkness the way others said their prayers. "I don't believe in God," he told a friend once. "I believe in me, and in the night." In the years that followed, the child from El Paso disappeared, replaced by something colder, something that learned how to survive by invading other people's light. The streets of Los Angeles didn't know it yet, but they were welcoming home a new kind of predator, one shaped not by madness alone, but by the worship of power itself. It was June 1984 when Los Angeles first met its nightmare. The city was restless, a heat wave pressed against the skyline, thick as smoke. People slept with windows open, trusting the cool air to ease the night. That trust was exactly what he needed. Inside a small apartment in Glassell Park, 9-year-old Jenny Vinkow lay alone in bed. Her son would find her the next morning, the window screen cut open. The sheets soaked, her throat so deeply it nearly severed her head. The room was a portrait of chaos. Drawers pulled out, the cross on the wall inverted, and above the headboard a faint pentagram traced in blood. There was no sign of forced entry beyond the window. No witnesses. No clear motive. Only the suggestion of ritual, and a signature that no one recognized yet. Police couldn't connect the dots. To them, it was just another brutal murder in a city of millions. But for the man who'd done it, it wasn't about theft or rage, it was about initiation. Richard Ramirez had crossed a threshold. He had tasted what he called the pure moment, the instant where another human's breath turns to silence. He felt alive for the first time. In the months that followed, he drifted across California's highways, living out of stolen cars and cheap motels. He broke into houses at random, stealing money, jewelry, sometimes just food. He didn't care who lived there. He said later, "I never picked the house the devil did." Each break-in grew bolder, stranger. He began leaving symbols, pentagrams, scratched into walls. Messages like "Jack the Knife" scrawled in lipstick. He watched his victims sleep before he struck. Sometimes he'd whisper into their ears before pulling the trigger. It wasn't about killing anymore. It was about domination, control, worship. By March 1985, Los Angeles County homicide detectives were comparing notes. An elderly couple in Monterey Park had been found murdered, their bodies dead. A woman in Rosemead was shot with a .22, her eyes gouged out. A teenage girl was abducted and assaulted, then left alive, a witness who described a thin man with rotten teeth, a black baseball cap, and eyes like mirrors. The press called him the walking killer. It wouldn't last, because when the pattern of midnight intrusions spread north to San Francisco, one headline would seal his infamy forever. The Night Stalker. That name stuck because it was true. He didn't hunt for pleasure or revenge. He hunted because night itself had become his religion. He prayed with his knife, confessed with his gun, and baptized his victims in terror. As summer drew near, the murders multiplied. Los Angeles was on fire, not with flames, but with fear. No one knew where he would strike next. No one could predict his pattern. Because there was no pattern, only chaos, and the man who worshipped it. By the spring of 1985, Los Angeles was no longer a city, it was a siege. The sun still shone, but no one felt safe in daylight anymore, because the devil worked the night shift. Every morning, the news read like scripture from a new religion of fear. Another break-in, another body, another pentagram on the wall. Police scanners screamed through neighborhoods. Neighbors formed watch groups, buying guns for the first time in their lives. Hardware stores ran out of locks, alarms, flashlights. Children slept in their parents' rooms. No one left windows open anymore. Even dogs refused to bark after midnight. And in the middle of it all, Richard Ramirez kept moving, barefoot sometimes, high on cocaine, carrying a pistol and a long-bladed knife, wandering the suburbs like a phantom with purpose only he understood. He didn't need to plan. He just waited for the city to fall asleep. Detectives couldn't draw a line between victims. Rich, poor, young, old, the only thing connecting them was night. Ramirez broke into a home in Arcadia, bludgeoned a woman to death with a lamp. A week later, he stormed into a house in Monterey Park, shot both residents, and carved a symbol into the wall. He attacked a couple in Whittier, sparing the husband only to make him watch. And in front of their partners, then murdered them after. He seemed to enjoy the randomness, as if each new victim proved his power over fate. To him, fear was a form of worship. At one scene, he left a message in lipstick, "Jack the Knife." At another, he drew a pentagram on a victim's thigh. He looked at the blood on his hands and smiled, not out of pride, but devotion. To Ramirez, Satan wasn't a symbol. He was an audience. The Los Angeles Sheriff's Department had no suspect and too many victims. Ballistics linked some shootings to the same. .22 caliber handgun, but the fingerprints were partial, the scenes contaminated, the motives senseless. He entered through open windows, side doors, garages, always from the dark, never from the same way twice. A detective later said, "He wasn't like Bundy or Dahmer. Those men wanted patterns. Ramirez wanted chaos. And chaos for a time was winning. Then came a clue, something small, stupid, and ordinary. At nearly every crime scene, investigators found the same footprint. A men's size 11.5 Avia sneaker, a rare model sold to less than a dozen stores in California. It wasn't much, but it was something. Police began quietly calling the suspect the Avia Man. As July bled into August, the Night Stalker became myth. News anchors warned viewers to lock windows, bless their homes, sleep in shifts. Helicopters circled the skies. Reporters whispered his name like a curse. Then came the break. A survivor, Maria Hernandez, 22, escaped an attack in Rosemead. She'd raised her hands just in time. The bullet ricocheted off her car keys. Her roommate, Dale Okazaki, wasn't so lucky. But Maria had seen him. She described the teeth, the dark eyes, the smell of sweat and sulfur. 2 days later, another victim survived in Monterey Park. She too described the same man. The sketch went public, and Los Angeles held its breath. For the first time, the Night Stalker had a face. Ramirez saw his own picture on the front page while buying coffee. He grinned. He didn't run. He simply whispered to himself, "It's time." That night, he drove north toward San Francisco, toward New Prey, and toward the end of his reign. It was the 31st of August 1985 when Los Angeles finally fought back. After months of terror, the man who had haunted a city stepped into the daylight, and this time, the darkness could not protect him. That morning, Richard Ramirez boarded a bus to East Los Angeles, unaware that his reign of fear was about to end. He had spent the night before in Tucson, Arizona, hiding in a friend's apartment. When he returned to California, he walked past a newsstand and froze. His own face stared back at him from every front page. The headline read, "The Night Stalker Identified." He smiled at first, perhaps in disbelief, perhaps in arrogance, but around him, the air shifted. People began to recognize the man from the paper. One woman gasped. Another pointed. Within minutes, whispers became shouts. He ran, down Hubbard Street, across intersections, through alleys barefoot, breathless, hunted. But this was no longer the city he ruled. This was a city united by fury. Men poured from their homes, shouting in English and Spanish. They chased him, cornered him, and struck him with pipes, bats, and fists. The predator became the prey. Police arrived just in time to save him from being beaten to death. Ramirez, bloodied and dazed, was handcuffed on the pavement. When an officer asked his name, he looked up and whispered, "Hail Satan." For the first time, Los Angeles exhaled. 4 years later, in 1989, the trial began. It was one of the most expensive and heavily covered cases in California's history. Richard Ramirez faced 43 charges, 13 murders, 5 attempted murders, 11 sexual assaults, and 14 burglaries. Each day, he entered the courtroom with long black hair, sunglasses, and a pentagram drawn on his hand. He smiled for the cameras, winked at women in the audience, and treated the courtroom like a stage. To him, fame was victory. The prosecution called him the embodiment of evil. The defense called him insane. The jury called him guilty. On the 20th of September 1989, the verdict was read, guilty on all counts. When the judge sentenced him to death, Ramirez leaned into the microphone and said, "Big deal. Death always comes with the territory. See you in Disneyland." He smiled again, the same smile that had haunted a city. In San Quentin prison, Ramirez became a dark celebrity. He received hundreds of letters, some from admirers, some from worshippers. They sent photographs, perfume, even wedding proposals. One woman, journalist Doreen Leoy, wrote to him for 11 years. In 1996, she married him inside the prison chapel, while he wore shackles. When asked why, she said, "I see the good in him that others don't." Ramirez replied, "Satan takes care of his own." He remained on death row for 23 years, never showing remorse, never denying what he had done. To him, death was not punishment, it was promotion. On the 7th of June 2013, Richard Ramirez died at age 53, not by the gas chamber, but by cancer. He died as he lived, defiant, silent, unrepentant. The state closed the file. The city tried to forget, but evil leaves fingerprints that never fade. San Quentin fell quiet after Richard Ramirez's death, but the silence did not last long. Within hours, letters, flowers, and candles appeared at the prison gates. They were not for the victims. They were for him, Some called him misunderstood. Some called him beautiful. Some wrote the same words he had once whispered, "Hail Satan." That is the sickness of fascination. When evil is wrapped in mystery, people start calling it art. After his death, documentaries, books, and online forums revived his name. The long black hair, the smile, the hollow eyes Richard Ramirez became what he always wanted to be, eternal. But immortality comes with a cost. Every time his face appears on a thumbnail or a documentary poster, the real victims fade further into the background. The predator remains famous. The innocent remain forgotten. The Night Stalker's legacy is not only in the crimes he committed, it is in what he left inside us, the reflection we cannot stop looking at. We replay his interviews, analyze his words, stare into his eyes, hoping to find an explanation. Maybe we want to understand him. Maybe we want to believe that monsters are made, not born. But sometimes there is no reason. He killed because he could. Because fear made him feel alive. Because darkness was the only God he ever believed in. He once said, "There is no good, no evil. There's only power and those too weak to take it." He was wrong. Paralyzed. Names fade, but the echo of fear, the whisper that the devil might live next door remains. Imagine Los Angeles again. The same streets, the same lights flickering across the skyline. The city sleeps now, but it remembers. A faint echo of footsteps, a shadow moving behind a curtain, and the uneasy truth that evil does not vanish, it waits. The Night Stalker is gone, but what he left behind is a question that never dies. If the devil looks like a man, how will we ever recognize him before it is too late?